Good day, everyone. I'm Arianne Jade, one of the members of Group 1, and today I will discuss about materials for evaluation. There are different materials available that we could use in teaching our learners. But the question is, are we choosing the right materials that are appropriate for our learners? So today, let us talk about materials for evaluation. What is material evaluation? As stated by Tomlinson, material evaluation is a procedure that involves measuring the value or potential value of a set of learning materials. It means that it is a process which includes giving judgment to a material if it is suitable to our learners or not. So there are different types of material evaluation that will be discussed later. Material evaluation tries to measure some or all of the following. First is the appeal of the materials to the learners. Is the material attractive or not? So it is important to know if the materials are attractive or not because there are different types of learners. So for instance, you are teaching learners in kindergarten. If the materials is not appealing or attractive to them, then expect that they will not indulge themselves on it. Next is the validity of the materials. Are we using materials that are valid and suitable to the needs of the learners or to the levels of the learners? Are we using materials which are intended to teach the appropriate skills that our learners need to learn or not? So we need to take into consideration these factors. Next is the ability of the materials to interest the learners and the teacher. So it is important that materials could tap the curiosity of the learners and teachers. So why? It is because learners and teachers are the people who are using the materials. If the materials would not tap the curiosity of these people, then expect that they will not read small amount of text on that material. Next is the ability of the materials to motivate the learners. So of course, if you got their curiosity or if you tap their interest, then they will be motivated to do the task that you will provide. So it will be easy to use the knowledge, the skills that they have. Next is the potential learning value of the materials. So are we using materials which would help our learners not only to develop but to enrich the skills that they have? Would they use what they know in a particular context? So that part should take into consideration. Next is the assistance given to the teachers in terms of preparation, delivery, and assessment. Remember that material should be our companion in teaching our learners. It should not be a hindrance on bringing them into a much higher level of learning. So it is important that material should also give assistance, especially to us educators, because we are the one who are really using it in teaching these learners. So by the time we prepare our lesson, to the delivery of our lesson, and of course, in evaluating or assessing if our learners gain something in what we teach to them. Next is the flexibility of the materials. Are the materials flexible enough to use in different contexts or not? So if it is flexible, you could use it anywhere, then it's good. But if not, of course, you also need to somehow adjust it. So in evaluating materials, it is a very useful tool as a guide to choose what materials to be used in the learning process. So now the question is, what is the purpose of the material evaluation or in evaluating materials? So in the year 2004, Mukundan argues that there are two purposes for evaluation. First one is select the course book. So through evaluating materials, we could select the course book that we could use. Next is determine the effectiveness of the course books while they are used. So while we are using certain course book or textbook, we could now identify if it has some effects to our students, especially while we are using it. We could evaluate the material, if it has some effects or not. So in the same year, Tomlinson and Masuhara indicate that the ultimate purpose of evaluation is for the development of material, identifying the potential strengths and weaknesses of the materials for selection and or development purposes is useful. So on contrary, based on the purposes said by the previous author, so we could say that, okay, based on Mukundan, right? So we need to select, we could use materials evaluation to select the course book to determine the effectiveness. So on contrary, with these purposes mentioned by him, Tomlinson and Masura stated the following. So redevelopment of material. So when we do material evaluation, we could think of the possible corrections that we could make to the material, which we can make it more suitable for our learners, for it can address what are the strengths or strong points of the materials, and of course, what are the flaws of it. So by identifying it, we could somehow adjust or change these factors. So after knowing the purpose, we have principles in materials evaluation. Ellis and Tomlinson stated these two principles in materials evaluation. So first principle is known as the effectiveness principle. So the question is the course book effective in meeting the needs of the learners? So for example, you have chosen a book, for example, that is reading. That book is something to do with enhancing the reading skills of the learners. So if at first your learners didn't know or does not know, your learners do not know anything about reading styles. So after using that material, for example, they were able to develop, not only to know, but also to develop the different reading styles. So you could see that this material, the material that you used, is effective for them because there are changes that are evident and visible within your learners. Next is efficiency principle. So the question here is, does a course book meet the needs of the learners more effectively than some alternative course books? Let's admit that we learners, we educators should not rely on one book. We should use various materials, right? Because for instance, you use these materials and after evaluating it, you notice that it is good because there are good effects, okay, good results performed by your students, and then you use another material. And then that material produced better outcomes or better result, better performance by your students. So you could somehow compare different materials, okay, the efficiency of it. You could somehow differentiate, this book is more efficient than this one because it produced more good outputs, much better outputs compared to the other one. So let's proceed now to the approaches to materials evaluation. So we have here ad hoc impressionistic evaluation. So it is based on intuitions, impression, and experience of using materials. And this kind of evaluation, valid methodological considerations may give way to an eye-catching appearance. Actually, this kind of approach would be somehow can have it could produce some bias, or you can be biased. Teachers could be biased when we use this approach because you will just look on the appearance of the material. Okay, so you will just look if it is attractive, if it is what should be the appearance of the ideal materials for the learners. On the other hand, we have another approach known as systematic evaluation. So it is based on a specification of objectives, principles, and procedures adopted or embedded in material. So from the word systematic, there is a system compared to the previous approach, which is the ad hoc impressionistic. Systematic evaluation somehow dig deeper on the material that you're about to use. So it looks on the specific objectives, the principles, underlying principles, and the procedures embedded on the materials that you're about to use. So it is not on the surface level, but in the deeper sense of your material. So it has 3 stages. So we have pre-use evaluation, whilst-use evaluation, or known as while in use evaluation, and post-use evaluation. So let's discuss about pre-use evaluation. Pre-use evaluation involves making prediction about the potential value of materials on people who use them. Meaning to say, from the word pre-use, before you use the material, of course, you need to look on its surface, right? From the cover, from the table of contents. So by reading those things, you could now make judgment about what could be the content or the coverage of the said material. So that is what we call this pre-use evaluation. Next is whilst-use evaluation, or known as while-in-use evaluation. So this measures the value of the materials while observing or using them. So obviously, you are trying to, in this process or in this stage, you are trying to judge the material, okay, while you are using it. So for we teachers, we're doing that, right? So for example, we use certain materials, and then when we gave these materials to our learners, and then we observe that they have a lot of questions, even though we have given them instructions, then we could say that somehow these materials, there are something wrong with these materials, or maybe the form of instructions, or we're not clear. So somehow, while we are using it, we could judge the material based on the responses of the students while doing the task or the material that we gave to them. So next is the post-use evaluation. So it is the most important and valuable type of evaluation according to Tomlinson because it can measure the actual effects of the materials on the users and provide reliable information. So compared to the previous stages, this is the most important since it is a post-use. So you could now identify what is the exact effects of the materials to your learners. So did the materials hit the objectives, the goals? Did it capture the interest of your learners? Did it develop the skills that you wish or you want them to use or to perform as they do the task? So this is very important. So another approach to materials evaluation is external evaluation. So it deals on claims made on the cover, introduction, and table of contents. Audience, proficiency level, context intended, how language is organized into teachable units, views on language, and methodology. So external evaluation is something to do with the surface. So for example, we are giving a certain book by our school, okay, principal, director, directress. So at first we need to check it. We need to check it by looking on the cover page, the content page, the blurb of it, and then the reviews. Just imagine before we buy books in bookstore, we tend to look on the reviews at the back cover of the book to see if it is good or to see if what we are looking, the theme that we are looking are there. So same with that, external evaluation has something to do with that. So we tend to look at the cover, if it is appealing, okay, if it's attractive, and then the back page to know more details about it, and the preface, and the table of contents to know the subject, okay, the contents, the teaching units that are included in the materials. So it will give us a view about the whole thing, about the whole material. So from the introduction and the table of contents, one can obtain information regarding the following points. So what is the target group? So to whom did this material intended for? What is their proficiency level? So are they beginners, intermediate, or advanced? Next, we also have what is the context in which the material is to be used? Is it general teaching program or a specific course focusing only on some aspect of language use? So what is the context of the material that we're going to use? Does it encompass all macro skills or just limited on one skill? So we need to look on it. Next is how have units lesson been organized? How many lessons intended for? How many teaching hours? How has the language been presented? So as we go through the table of contents, we could now identify the different lessons. Are they arranged from simple to complex or complex to simple? So by looking on the table of contents, we could identify those things. So next is what is the writer's view of language learning and teaching methodology? So if you're reading how the author presented his idea on the introduction or preface of the book or the material, then you could get somehow his or her beliefs about teaching methodologies, about teaching to the learners. So somehow we educators, we have different perspectives about how we're going to teach our students. So somehow this could affect how we choose materials. For example, you are idealistic, so you tend to look on materials which will support somehow your belief. If you're realistic, then you would choose material which are suitable for learners to see the reality of the work, right? So it could actually reflect or affect how we choose the material. Next is, are there pictures, charts, diagrams, and how closely are they integrated into text? So you need also to look as you do external evaluation. Of course, you will scan the material, right? So you need to look if there are pictures included, diagram or graphical representation there. And of course, if you notice that there are pictures, charts, diagrams, you also need to look if these factors or these things are related to what you intend to teach. Because, for example, in a preschool, you provided some pictures, but those are not related to the topic. So somehow it will make you think that maybe there's something wrong with the materials. You need to reevaluate this. So you could somehow suggest it. So by looking at this on this factor, we could somehow helping the author to somehow correct, okay, or to correct points on the provided material. Is the text too culturally loaded for the learner to understand it? So since K-12 curriculum wants us to integrate culture, so there are texts wherein learners are having a hard time to understand the meaning of it. So as we do external evaluation, we also need to look if our learners could digest, especially tradition or culture presented on it. So if not, of course, we need to do some steps on how we're going to enlighten our learners in order for them to fully understand what was written on the text. Next is the material subversive of gender equality, peace, human rights, etc.? Or in other words, what is the value system? Is it implicitly stated or not? So there are materials wherein, especially nowadays, they tackle current issues, especially for teenagers. So it is very important that we as teacher, we look on the materials if they are appropriate, if they are really suitable to the value system that we want our learners to know or to get as they indulge themselves to the materials. Another approach is internal evaluation. So internal evaluation pertains to in-depth look at 2 or more units, representation of skills, grading, and sequencing kinds of text, relation text, exercise. So if you will compare external to internal evaluation dig deeper to the content of the material rather than on the surface compared to the external evaluation. And in addition, internal evaluation also refers to an in-depth investigation of the materials to find out how far the claims made by publisher and authors are justified and whether those claims have been adequately translated into teachable content. So compared to the external evaluation, you will just read, okay, the content, the review, okay, the review of it. In internal evaluation, you're now trying to prove if those claims stated by the author in the preface or introduction could be really seen on the material or course book. Thus, in checking the truth and justification of writer claims, internal inspection consists in examining the following in particular. Representation of the skills in the course materials. So, are the skills presented appropriately from simple to complex or complex to simple? Next is the grading and sequencing of the materials. You also need to look if the grading are suitable, if it uses holistic or analytical rubric, and if those rubrics are suitable to the kind of test that we gave to our learners. And of course, the sequence of the materials, it is very important. So compared to the external evaluation, you could just judge the material by looking at the table of contents. While in internal evaluation, you need to really see to it that the materials or the lessons in a course book has this organization or sequential flow. Next is the nature of the text. Is it mainly in the form of sentences or very short paragraphs, or extended reading passages? So especially if you have a course book for reading, it is very important to identify the nature of the text. If it provides opportunity for learners to discover or to read different types of text. Because if you choose to, if you want them to develop appropriate reading skills, then you should provide, or the material that you will choose should provide variety of exercises wherein they could use or they could develop their skills in reading. If development of listening, skills is one of the claims made, is the book accompanied by audio materials. So for example, you have chosen to develop the listening skills of your learners. So it is important to know if the book contains various materials that are suitable for listening, okay? Does it have or provide links wherein learners could listen to a certain audio, right? So in listening skills, okay, in order for them to develop it, we also need to provide situational conversation wherein they are the one who are speaking and the other one is listening. So is your material have those kinds of activities? So again, there should be variation. Are there dialogues and the materials for developing speaking skills? How natural or artificial are those dialogues? Are these opportunities for learners to learn to speak in a manner or that makes for learning? So it is important that you provide authentic tests, okay? So you provide your learners authentic context for and they could really use what they know and what they should know. Next, exercises, tests, and other practices materials. To what extent do exercises reflect learners' needs? Wait a minute, I will just, okay. So again, exercises, tests, and other practice material. To what extent do exercises reflect learners' need? Again, you need to give variation on what activities, tests, quizzes, okay, practical test, okay, situational analysis, role playing. You need to give variation, but make sure that these exercises also reflect the needs of the learners, because even though you give variety of learning experiences, but these are not suitable to the needs of the learners, then you could see that, or you could say that your materials is somehow not aligned to what you need to teach your students. So next is we have here, we'll just move it here. Okay, so teacher-learner balance in the use of materials. So remember that not all the materials that you're going to use are suitable for the learners. Maybe it is suitable for us teachers, but not for our learners. So it is important to also consider, is this material has or contains activities wherein my learners could somehow do self-discovery or self-study, okay? Because there are learners who wanted to or who wants to learn on their own. Are there materials, is your materials have those kinds of activities? So remember, there are different types of learning styles. So again, if we have diverse learners, then we should have diverse activities that are suited to their learning styles. Okay, so do the materials promote the relationship that exists or should exist between the teacher and the learner? So if you provide materials that are somehow could fit to their learning styles, and at the same time hitting their needs, then somehow you could build a strong relationship with your learners. And at the same time, you are also motivating them to learn more. So why do we need to evaluate? First is, of course, to identify the popular and successful features of existing materials, which will help us to produce better materials. So, of course, as I've mentioned earlier, it is important for us to evaluate because it will help us to identify the strong points and the weak points of the materials that we are using. Especially if you want to produce our own materials, it is very beneficial to evaluate materials because it would help us to change our principles and beliefs in constructing our own materials, which is very useful in the classroom. Next is to choose suitable materials for language programs. So of course, as we evaluate many materials, we could find appropriate materials for our own class. Next, to adapt the materials to make them better suit the needs of the students and the needs of teaching. So after evaluating materials, it is now time for us to adopt appropriate materials. Are we going to use it or not? Okay, are we going to use that material or not? Or if we say adapting materials, or are we going to change something to fit on what the learners need to learn? So I know the next presenter will discuss adapting materials or adaptation of materials. So next is to identify how successful the materials used in the classroom are. So of course, our end goal is to find a material which will suit for our learners. So in doing this, we could now somehow get if we are using materials successfully or not. And if not, then somehow we could change the way we also use it as teachers. Next is to examine whether the materials fulfill the prescribed course. So, of course, we discuss about the different stages of evaluation, right? Pre-use, while in use, and post-use, right? So, there are times wherein we just evaluate the materials and we think this is the best for us to use, okay? And then while we are using it, somehow we encountered problems upon using it. And after using it, we somehow think that, oh, maybe this is not suitable for my learners. So if we did that, so we could now examine if we really use accurate materials or not. Of course, there are criteria, checklists, and format in doing that. So later on, my other mates will discuss about it. Next is to examine the extent to which materials permit students to achieve learning objectives. So are the materials or the exercises and the materials really allow students to achieve the learning goals or objectives stated in the curriculum or in the course area or not? So if not, you could somehow write a recommendation so the author of the course book could change it. Next is to identify whether the designs of the materials are suitable for a task-based syllabus. So it is evident that nowadays the K-12 curriculum wants us to give opportunities for learners to use the skills that they have in real life context. So that's why if we tend to give more tasks, evaluation could actually help us to know if we are using materials, appropriate materials that could promote more collaboration with our learners, especially in doing tasks. So I think this is the last point on why do we need to evaluate. So these are the references that I used in my presentation. So remember that in evaluation or in materials evaluation, it is one of the most important things that we teacher must do, because as we do this, we are helping not only ourselves and learners, but also we are somehow upgrading the way we think about materials, about using materials. And we are also challenging ourselves to change the way we choose materials. Okay, it is not just about the availability of the materials, but also about the effects of it, and also the change that we could contribute to the curriculum as we evaluate materials, especially now. In just one click, you could get various materials, right? So let us not confine ourselves in using just one material in teaching our learners. It is very important that we evaluate evaluate them appropriately so we could provide not perfect, I mean, we could provide suitable learning environment for our learners wherein they will not be afraid to admit that these are the knowledge that they know and these are the things that they want to know. So we could guide them more. Okay, so I know it is somehow a toxic or tiring task, but it is actually beneficial for everyone. So that's all, and thank you for your attention. Thank you for your participation. So thank you for bearing with me, and thank you for listening, and may God bless us all. Thank you.